What if I told you there is a robot that controls more wealth than any country on earth? A robot so powerful that in the last 10 years, it has quietly created the biggest company in the world. This is the story of a robot called Aladdin. It's Wall Street's best kept secret, and it's gobbling up every asset class across every industry. Aladdin now controls $21 trillion of our global economy. To put that in perspective, that's more than the $20 trillion GDP of the US or the $15 trillion GDP of the entire European Union. The New Statesman wrote, the total physical cash of all 7 billion people and every company, bank vault, wallet, and piggy bank in the world is around $5 trillion. Aladdin has grown into a system responsible for more than 4 times the value of all the money in the world. This one robot directs the actions of the US Federal Reserve, almost every major bank and investment fund on Wall Street, and over 17,000 traders. It controls half of all ETFs, 17% of the bond market, 10% of the global stock market, and carries out 250,000 trades every day and billions of forecasts every week. Year after year, it hoovers up trillions of data points on every market, every company, every asset, and now even each of us, what we buy, sell, and say, so that it knows what to buy and what to sell far better than any human being. Every major bank, company, and investment fund has come to rely on Aladdin and its all-powerful AI and algorithms to beat the market. And if they didn't, they've collapsed and failed in Aladdin's wake. And you know what the craziest part of this story is? This robot is just getting started. So where did Aladdin come from and how did it get so powerful? Aladdin is the brainchild of Larry Fink, the founder of BlackRock, and its total dominance has made his company the biggest shadow bank in the world and the most powerful company on earth. The story you're about to hear is equally unbelievable and terrifying. In fact, you would think it was science fiction if it wasn't very real and happening today.
What if I told you that there was a company so powerful on the planet today that it affects almost every single aspect of our lives? A company that is so rich that they hold more assets than the GDP of every single country in the world except for 2. A company that is the single largest investor in the destruction of our planet's forests and the largest money contributor to the fossil fuels industry. And what if I also told you that it's very likely you are responsible for the funding of this company and allowing it to do what it does? And even if you tried your absolute hardest, it would almost be impossible for you to stop giving them money. The scary fact is that this company does exist and you have most likely never heard its name before. The company is BlackRock. Because it gives you an insight into how the ownership of the planet works and who might be pulling the strings of almost everything in our entire lives. And that likely you are contributing to this whole mess by funding this whole entire show. Okay, so let's talk about BlackRock and some of the giant problems that are associated with this enormous company. First and foremost, BlackRock is the largest asset management firm on the planet. They hold stocks, ownership of companies, property, and a ton of other stuff, of course with the main purpose of driving profit for themselves and their shareholders. And they own a part of almost everything. And when I say everything, I really mean everything. Let me explain how. The names on the screen are the 7 biggest banks in America. And in some way or another, if you are an American that gets loans, does your banking, has investments, or has your pension fund, you are likely connected to one of these banks. But who owns these banks? Well, in one way or another, BlackRock does. BlackRock is either the largest or one of the largest shareholders in all of these 7 banks. All of them. So if you are part of the general American banking system, it's likely you don't really have a choice whether or not to deal with BlackRock, and you're putting your trust in them to hold some of your money. You might think you have a choice with banking, but really it's an illusion of choice. But if you don't live in America, don't think that you are safe, because it's likely that you are within BlackRock's reach as well. For example, BlackRock owns shares in the 4 biggest Australian banks, and it is the single largest shareholder in all of these banks. In Germany, they own part of Deutsche Bank, the Commerzbank, as well as owning a big part of Germany's postal system. In the UK, they are the largest shareholder in Lloyds Bank, and throughout Europe, there are almost no country that BlackRock doesn't own shares in at least one financial institution or bank. From the digging we've done, it seems that every single bank in Iceland does some sort of business with BlackRock, or it invests its company's money into BlackRock's funds. So that is banking, but there are many other ways that your money finds its way to BlackRock as well. Chances are, if you've ever done any work before, you have a pension fund. Pension funds could be called 401, superannuation, or just a pension fund depending where in the world you live. When you put your money into pension funds, your fund puts it into investments to help it grow for retirement, but it's probably likely you don't have a say where this money is actually going. But it doesn't really matter anyway, because they're all basically investing with BlackRock. In the developed world, there is a very, very, very high chance that your money in your pension fund is being invested with BlackRock or in a a fund connected to BlackRock in some way, so your money is finding its way there as well. And what about insurance? Well, many of the largest insurance companies such as AIG or Allianz are either owned in part or invest with BlackRock's funds. And in America, more insurance companies hold their investments with BlackRock than with any other company. So it doesn't really matter where you're putting your money anyway, because in some way, shape or form, your money is finding its way to BlackRock. In places like America, it has been reported that BlackRock and pension funds are paying up to 50% higher than the asking price of single-family homes in the attempt to buy as much of the real estate market as they can, and in turn, massively driving up the prices of real estate and lowering the chances of the everyday person like you and I to buy those homes. Media outlets like Vox would like you to believe that the housing market problems and the reason that the average person can't buy a home is nothing to do with the fact that Wall Street banks such as Goldman Sachs and BlackRock are flooding the market with money. But what they don't tell you in this article is that Vox is actually sponsored for a very long time by Wall Street bank Goldman Sachs. And on top of that, BlackRock actually owns a part of Vox by owning shares in the parent company of Vox called Comcast. So who can you trust? But it does get even crazier than this. To really show you BlackRock's reach, you don't just look directly at what they own, you also look what they own by association. BlackRock owns a stake in many investment firms and investment banks around the world. Let's take Goldman Sachs, for example, the one that I just mentioned. This investment bank has been at least partially considered to be responsible for the 2008 financial crisis. BlackRock is one of the largest shareholders in Goldman Sachs, meaning that they have very significant voting rights as to where Goldman Sachs invests its money. It means, by extension, that BlackRock also owns a lot more than what appears first on paper. And remember the example that I gave of Goldman Sachs sponsoring Vox? Well, considering that BlackRock owns a part of Goldman Sachs, they could also be considered as a sponsor of Vox. Want to get even crazier? Okay, well, I thought you'd never ask. There is this thing called circular ownership. Basically, it means when two companies own a part of one another. For example, let's take another of the world's largest investment banks, which is JP Morgan. JP Morgan is owned by shareholders and other large institutional investors. And yes, you guessed it, BlackRock owns a part of JP Morgan. But JP Morgan also owns a part of BlackRock. So they not only own a part of each other, but because they own a part of a company that owns a part of them, technically they kind of own themselves as well. Confused? Well, that might actually be the point. In a lot of cases, business structures like these are designed in order to make it a little bit more confusing as to who owns what. The problem with circular ownership is that it can cause huge conflicts of interest and allow companies to have shadow monopolies on certain sectors of business without them having a direct monopoly. In fact, this type of business structure, circular ownership, is actually illegal in parts of the world because of how this type of business ownership can be used or exploited. But what about diversity and competition within business? Well, let's take Coca-Cola, for example, arguably the largest drink manufacturer in the entire world. And yes, I know that, I'm going to already say that BlackRock owns a huge portion of Coca-Cola. But what about Coke's biggest competitor, PepsiCo? They have been in drink wars for the years, constantly battling as to which one is better. So there wouldn't be a conflict of interest, right? Oh, wait, no. Of course, BlackRock is one of the largest owners of PepsiCo as well. But what about the news? I am sure that you think that there's a huge diversity in the media and the global landscape. But when you look at who owns the news, you might start to think about this a little bit differently. It doesn't really matter what side of the political spectrum that you fall on or what news source that you think is more truthful, because chances are BlackRock actually owns a portion of one of these news outlets. Fox News, the New York Times, CNN, the ABC, NBC, the New York Post, Sky News, The Sun, and on and on and on. In one way or another, BlackRock owns a part of basically every media organization or major news outlet on the planet, from North America to Asia, Australia, and beyond. Social media as well, Twitter, Facebook, which means by extension, WhatsApp and Instagram. Yep, BlackRock is one of the biggest owners of these platforms as well. In fact, it's estimated that in one way or another, BlackRock and Vanguard, which is the second largest asset management in the world, owns part of more than 90% of the media that we consume on a daily basis. So based on that, is it possible that BlackRock could have significant power in order to get any message that they wanted to across the world? I'll let you decide that one for yourself. I think by now you're starting to get the picture. And when I said at the beginning of the video that there is a company that owns a huge chunk of the planet, I wasn't actually kidding. Whether it is through direct ownership or indirect ownership through companies that they own themselves, it seems that BlackRock has a finger in almost every single pie, and there doesn't seem to be an industry exempt from their management and their control. And with so much ownership, BlackRock has a phenomenal amount of power. At the time of recording, it has been said that BlackRock owns $9 trillion worth of assets. That is not 9 billion, that is not 9 million, that is 9 trillion. That is a very big number, and sometimes it's impossible to try to wrap your mind around that. But to illustrate this point a little bit more, 9 trillion is more than the GDP of every single country on the planet except for two, United States and China. Think about that. Think about how much value a country like Germany or Japan or Russia or Canada or South Korea or Australia or the UK produces in a single year. How much these countries and their citizens spend on infrastructure, trade, education, their military, and the value of the goods and services they produce in a year. BlackRock holds more in assets than the GDP of every single one of these places, and that is some serious power. And with great power comes great responsibility. So how responsible is BlackRock? According to the data, BlackRock is the largest investor in fossil fuels on the planet, as well as the main contributor to money flowing into the destruction of the planet's forests and ecosystems, including deforestation in the Amazon. There is so much more that I could talk about BlackRock. I could talk about how they have been accused of abuse of human rights towards the indigenous around the world. I could tell you that even if your bank or your pension fund doesn't directly fund BlackRock, they most likely still have access to your private information because of their own financial management system called Aladdin. And I could tell you that BlackRock's main competitors, such as Vanguard and others, are also just as worrying towards the state of the world. Now, if any of this stuff scares you, it kind of should. Companies with this much power can single-handedly sway the economic future of our world. It is all of our fault. It's our money flowing from our banks, our pension funds, our investments that are going directly to these companies. We might say that we don't want the Amazon to be destroyed or that we don't want our planet to be degraded, but everything comes down to where the money is flowing. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do any of this without us. Because without us, they wouldn't have the financial strength to dip into almost every single industry in the entire world and dictate it according to exactly how they want it to be. None of us can really ever have zero negative impact on the planet, and there will always be somebody at the top. But when you do follow the money and you choose not to stay ignorant as to where your money is flowing, you can actually make a significant change. Remember that we are the masses, and if all of us make a small effort, this tiny effort of just checking where the money is flowing, we can make huge differences on this world.
Yeah.